Coming up on 2020 on ID, a glittering city and the dark side of greed.
It's a story that has everything in it. Drugs and millions of dollars, kidnapping and crime.
A self-made millionaire who had it all. Houses, cars, a beautiful wife. Now they wanted it too and would do anything to get it.
They said we kidnap him.
We'll shake him down, and then we'll let him go, and that's it. That was the plan. The problem is it turned into a lot more than that.
Now, I got 2 bullets in this gun.
They would take me to a chair, put a gun to my head, cock the hammer.
And that starts the making of the perfect crime.
If you don't take him off the street, they're going to do this again.
Hot. Violent.
Look behind you, I'm coming for you.
And inspired by envy and betrayal.
I'm gonna get you.
Revenge for real. Miami. Welcome to 2020 on ID. I'm John Quinones. Sometimes the truth really is stranger than fiction. You're about to see a true life tale of betrayal and revenge, full of so many twists and turns and life and death drama that it's hard to believe it actually happened. As first told in 2013, this is the real story, with interviews from the real people involved and dramatic recreations based on what actually happened. It's set in Miami, the kind of town where luxury can blur the line between fantasy and reality, and envy can turn to murder.
They say living well is the best revenge, and self-made millionaire Mark Marcelo Schiller was living well.
I started creating businesses since I was 9, finding different ways to make money. I would stand outside of the supermarket, Wallbounds in Brooklyn, and offer to carry people's groceries home for $0.10 a quarter.
He grew up poor, first in Argentina and then New York.
Come on, you ready?
But now he had a beautiful wife and 2 beautiful children. And everything he touched seemed to turn to gold.
Come to daddy. Come over here.
I was making a considerable amount of money, but I lived a normal life.
Of course, normal is a relative term. In his safe, $14,000 in cash, $100K in his checking account. He owned a number of businesses, a successful accounting firm.
My accounting practice, it was a cash cow.
A nutritional supplement company. Plus, he had investments. A 34-story condominium tower. A restaurant. Oh yes, in the Cayman Islands, $500,000 in offshore accounts. And he had a friend, George Delgado.
Hi, Mark.
His assistant introduced them.
She comes to me and she says, my husband, Jorge Delgado, he's just lost his job. We're living with my parents. Could you give him a job? And I've always been, softy, so I said, okay, bring him in.
He started out as a gopher, but after only 4 years, he'd worked his way up to become Mark's right-hand man.
It's a good stuff.
Yeah. Mark became a very good friend of George, taught him the business and kind of made him a man that could do something and support himself.
George Delgado devoted his life to Schiller.
My wife will make him food. He was like part of the family.
And Schiller wanted to reward his loyalty.
What happened eventually, I said, okay, let's do something else. I said, let's form a mortgage buying and selling business.
He'd made partner, and Delgado was grateful, of course. But it wasn't enough. He wanted more. His own deals, his own identity. He wanted to improve himself.
One more, let's go.
And all that started to come true for him at a place called the Sun Gym.
Good job, man. Right on.
Well, the Sun Gym was a place where people were pumping iron, they were using steroids to help themselves look better, and they were interested in breaking into the Miami scene.
And no one was more interested than the manager of the gym, Danny Lugo.
They're about to check him out.
Lugo was a very personable guy. He looked sort of like a thug, but he was a very charming man.
He was, for lack of a better term, smooth. He had wives that he divorced that still would do anything for him.
If you had to pick a word, you'd say he was the brains behind this organization. But I have to say that's really stretching the word brains.
But you don't have to be smart to be dangerous. And Lugo was soon filling Delgado's head with ideas. Not all of them 100% legal.
So what are you doing tonight?
Right from the get-go, I didn't like him. He was one of these characters you can tell was bad news.
So,
Lugo had a criminal record for fraud, and Schiller says he told Delgado not to trust him.
I pulled him aside, who's this guy? He's a friend I made at the gym. You're going to the gym? And I said, you got to be kidding me. We had to know Jorge. He was a slim little guy. He's not a gym type.
And that's when Mark starts to try and pull away from George.
Hey, Mark.
When Delgado started getting into shady business deals with Lugo, Schiller says he finally cut him off, dissolving their partnership.
I'm not signing this.
I go, listen, last thing I'm going to tell you is if you stay friends with Lugo, you're going to end up getting in trouble. Just remember these words today. And that was the last time I talked to him.
Delgado was devastated. What was he going to do for money? He was back to square one.
George Delgado feels at some point that he was shortchanged.
He actually had George believing somehow that Mark had cheated him out of $200,000. And George felt he needed to be vindicated.
George Delgado wanted revenge. Gym manager Lugo and his buddy Adrian Doorball commiserated.
Nice.
And took him to the place they always went when they wanted to think. They told Delgado Schiller wasn't his friend.
what's up, buddy? What's on your mind? Why you look so
They told him Schiller had ripped him off.
We're here to help.
And they had a novel idea how to get what was owed to him.
I'm thinking, we kidnap him.
Coming up, what drives a man to betray his mentor?
They all wanted what they didn't have and decided that it would be theirs for the taking.
They have tasers. They have guns.
Come on, come on!
What Schiller didn't know was what these guys were going to do next.
Mark Schiller was living the American dream. He started with nothing and made his fortune through hard work. His protege, George Delgado, wanted that dream too, and he was a young man hungry to rise in the world. But the two men had a falling out, and Delgado now felt he had nothing. That meant Mark Schiller was in a lot of trouble.
What drives a man to betray his mentor? Well, he was an ex-mentor now. An ex-mentor who had everything Delgado wanted.
You could always count on me. Whatever problem he had, whatever he had, he needed.
Well, Delgado needed a lot.
I would never said no to him. I was always there for him as a friend.
And that was really all this was about.
George Delgado's with his two buddies, and he's complaining.
I deserve more.
George needed his friend's money. After all, Schiller had cut him off. Wasn't Delgado entitled to a little revenge?
So Lugo gets a brilliant idea that we'll shake him down and then we'll let him go, and that's it.
Think about it.
That was the plan. The problem is it turned into a lot more than that.
I don't know what Lugo painted in his head that made him change, but from the time he met Lugo, he became a different person.
They say envy burns brightest in the dark.
They all wanted what they didn't have, and I think that they saw some money in front of them and decided that it would be theirs for the taking.
Come on, man, let's go.
Of course, not every plan emerges fully grown.
The attempts that they made to kidnap Schiller so they could force him to return the money, if this case wasn't so tragic, would be comical.
It looks like he's home.
They were so inept. They made attempt after attempt, hiding under blankets in his front yard, dressed as ninjas, to capture him, only to be thwarted by the headlights of an approaching car.
Abort, abort.
And then they're running through backyards yelling, abort, abort, like this is some kind of CIA mission.
Oh, there he is, there he is, there he is. Duck, duck.
There were some things that happened in hindsight that I see now, but at the time, I pay no attention to them.
But practice makes perfect.
Is he looking over here?
And the gang from the Sun Gym was about to get lucky.
Okay, all right, let's go. You ready? Don't mess this up.
Mark Schiller is on his way home from his restaurant.
Now.
I usually parked in front. That day, for some reason, I parked in the back. All of a sudden, three guys approached me from behind. I thought they wanted to steal the car. So I said, if you want the car, take it.
They have tasers, they have guns, and they just begin beating and mostly tasing him.
Come on, come on!
They drag him into a van.
Hurry up, get him in the car!
I was terrified. I just thought it was a hit. They were just going to take me somewhere, shoot me.
Tape him up!
They put tape around my eyes. They put me in between the driver's seat and the first bench.
Yeah, yeah!
The van races away, and one of the kidnappers makes a phone call.
The Eagle has landed.
And for Mark Schiller, the first hints that this isn't random, it's personal.
Shut it! You don't have the right to live the life you do.
And one of the guys said, you have no right to live the life you do. And I go, oh, so they know me. They were having a great time. You thought that they won the lottery.
Grab that watch, man.
They take his presidential Rolex, his jewelry, and then suddenly drive into a warehouse.
So they took me out of the van.
And that's when basically the torture begins.
Then they started beating me with a bat, shock, punching. They were taking turns, I guess.
And finally, the motive becomes clear.
We want to talk about some of your assets.
Give us a list of it. Come on.
We want a list of your assets. And I go, what for? I wasn't really panicked because whatever they wanted, they weren't going to get it if I was dead.
But if you want to get to someone, threaten the ones they love.
Your pretty wife and your two beautiful, beautiful children.
They told me, if you don't cooperate and give us what we want, we're going to bring your wife and kids here. We're going to take turns raping your wife.
Over and over again.
And we're going to chain your kids to the wall.
Schiller says in that one instant, everything changed.
Speak.
Okay, I'll do it.
All right, start talking.
So whatever you want, you can have it. But let's make a deal. You let my wife and kids go out of the country, and you can have whatever you want. That's the deal, because that was their leverage. And once they lost their leverage, that was it. At least I thought so anyway.
But the kidnappers had a different kind of leverage in mind.
It's ringing.
They made me call my wife.
Hello.
And I said, hey, she said, where are you? Oh, I'm fine. I had to go on a business trip. Because they would tell me what I had to say. And the next day I said, I want you to do me a favor. Just take a change of clothes and leave the country.
Tonight? Are you kidding?
Leave everything else there, just what it is.
Right now, you gotta leave right now. Good job, bud. Good job.
His wife is Colombian. And, in South America, back then, a lot of times if you were kidnapped, there was a pretty good chance the police were involved. And so with that in mind, when he called his wife and told her, you need to go to your mother's in Colombia and don't call anybody, especially the police, she didn't.
In those first days, Mark had been racking his brain trying to figure out who these guys could be. And then, with one remark, the kidnappers give it away.
We know your assets.
And finally they said, since you're not giving us a list of assets, we're going to give you a list of your assets. Bingo. There was only one person.
How about the $10,000 you got locked up? The $500,000 in overseas account. Condos in South Beach.
They had the list of assets better than I did. So I knew automatically Delgado.
He knew George Delgado was involved, and he had recognized Danny Lugo's voice from prior meetings. So he'd put the pieces together.
What Schiller didn't know was what these guys were going to do next.
Sign right there.
And that starts the making of the perfect crime.
Thank you, buddy.
Because they then have him to themselves. And if he dies, his wife's in Colombia, nobody really knows what happened. She doesn't trust the police. These idiots could actually get away with it.
Coming up, days turned into weeks.
He's signing away his house,
They took his cars.
condos,
They started transferring his bank account money.
everything that that man owned. So at this point, they have to kill him.
George Delgado and his friends have kidnapped Mark Schiller, Delgado's former mentor. They've beaten him and threatened his family unless he turns over his assets. Following their instructions, Schiller has talked his wife into leaving the country with their children. As bad as all that is, the really bad part hasn't even started yet. And Schiller knows that his once good friend Delgado is one of the men responsible.
What was it like for Delgado, standing in the shadows while his associates torture his friend? How he must have suffered. But there were compensations.
It's huge, man. Look at this.
Before Mark's wife and kids were even on the plane, they had moved into Schiller's house.
They liked that house. In the mid-90s, that was an expensive house in Miami. It was in a gated community in an upscale development.
The servant had become the master, and life was good.
They told the neighbors that they were in the CIA.
And the neighbors bought it. Back at the warehouse, they started forcing Mark to sign over his assets to them. Each of them had a role. Lugo was the leader and investment guru. With the first money they took from Schiller, he invested in IBM. Doorbal was the muscle. Delgado provided the inside information.
Well, they started transferring, consolidating all my accounts. I had money in my brokerage accounts, my IRAs. My DJ and Associates, which was my accounting company. The procedure was always the same. They would take me to a chair, put a gun to my head, cock the hammer, and make me talk to the banker and tell them. And a couple of times I had problems because some of these people knew me.
Hi, this is Mr. Schiller here.
They knew this was normal.
If he refused, the cruelest game of all.
Finally, they said, we're going to play a game. Let's see if you know the game.
Now, I got 2 bullets in this gun.
And it was Russian roulette. Spin the thing right next to me so I would hear it and fire it.
During those weeks, they did more to him than I think people suffer as prisoners of war in horrible countries.
So they pulled the trigger right. They would all start laughing hysterically, and they were all like, they couldn't stop.
Bam!
There was some of it that clearly was just for pleasure.
All of a sudden I hear fire. Then again, fire. And 6 times they burned my arm. I mean, my arm was all burned.
It wasn't like they would hit him or burn him or torture him when they wanted him to sign something and he refused. They were getting their jollies off here. They were getting excited about torturing this man for no reason.
I was just numb. I mean, it was just, you're almost to the point where you're going to be unconscious.
They fed him very, very little. He lost, according to him, about 40 pounds.
And each day, another asset disappeared.
Sign right there.
They're putting documents in front of him and saying sign. Now he can't see. He's just putting his pen down, they're putting it on the paper, and he's signing his signature.
Days turned into weeks, and they realized, why stop at just a couple of $100,000? Why not take it all? His companies, his real estate investments, his offshore accounts in the Caymans.
He's signing away his house.
They took his cars.
Condos.
They started transferring his bank account money.
Everything that man owned. It was actually kind of remarkable that one of the checks was signed sideways. So on some checks, his signature goes across, on some it's below the line, and on some it's actually vertical.
They even started selling the furniture and paintings in the house.
They took everything in the house. They took the jacuzzi, the light switch cover plates. They took all my pictures, all my videos that I had of the kids. They became me. They were living in my house, sleeping in my bed, using my credit cards, driving my car.
But the horrible part was that as each asset disappeared, Schiller knew he was one step closer to death.
Yeah, if you lie to us, we're going to kill you. I'm saying to myself, well, they're going to kill me anyway, so what's the difference?
3 weeks have gone by, and Lugo, Doorbal, and Delgado are starting to realize they won't need Schiller much longer, and his presence in the world is starting to be inconvenient. There's just one last asset.
They bring me over to the table, and they go, you're signing your death sentence. I knew it was my life insurance policy. I had $2 million.
They force him to sign it over to one of Lugo's loyal ex-wives. Now there's nothing left for Mark to sign away.
So at this point, they have to kill him. They devised this plan. They've had him calling his lawyer. They've had him calling and making excuses that he has a girlfriend and he's going through a midlife crisis, and just they're kind of setting up his disappearance.
On day 30, they let him speak to his family one last time.
Hello, honey. It's me.
They let me call my wife, and that was the hardest phone call for me.
And she puts his 5-year-old son on the phone.
And I knew I was talking to him for the last time.
And that I really felt, because at that point my son was 5 years old.
But at that point, I knew I wasn't going anywhere. You know, next place was, 6 feet under. It wasn't going to be back home, so.
We got this.
Lugo, Delgado, and Doorball know just how to dispose of Mark Schiller.
They actually have a pretty good plan.
Their plan is they bring his SUV to the warehouse, they're going to put him in it, they're going to crash the vehicle with him inside and make it look like a drunk driver.
They gave me some concoction to drink.
Come on, man. Have a drink. Have a drink. It's good for you.
After maybe 30, 40 seconds, maybe a minute, I was out.
And with him inside, they crash it into a pole. They get out, they spread gasoline inside the car.
They lit the car on fire.
Their revenge seems complete, and now 2 million reasons to make a fast getaway. But just as they're about to leave, the most annoying thing happens.
Somehow or other, I was able to get out of the car.
The flames revive him enough that Marcelo Schiller opens the door to the car and stumbles out of the flaming car.
Mark Schiller still isn't dead, but Doorball and Lugo are up to the challenge.
Doorball is screaming, "Run him over."
Run him over. Run him over.
Boom, they drive over him with their car.
Wait, hold on.
And then they put it in reverse and they back over his body. So at this point, he's got to be dead.
They say if you want something done right, you have to do it yourself. But there's one small problem. Schiller isn't dead. Coming up.
I survived.
Who would have thought that he would survive all of that? But he did.
I woke up and I said, oh my God, I'm alive.
And now, he wants revenge.
If anybody did that to you, wouldn't you want to get back at them somehow?
I'm gonna get you. Look behind you, I'm coming for you.
Mark Schiller wasn't supposed to be alive. A gang of 3 men, including his one-time protege and friend, George Delgado, have kidnapped and tortured him and then made him sign away all his assets. Then they put him in a car, crashed it, burnt it, and when he somehow crawled out, they ran over him twice. It should have killed him, but it didn't.
They say every awakening is sweet, but some are sweeter than others.
Marcelo Schiller wakes up in the ER.
I woke up and I said, oh my God, I'm alive.
Not that everything was perfect.
And the pain was just, couldn't be described, the pain I was in.
His pelvis was shattered when the car ran over him. His bladder had been ruptured, and surgeons had to remove his spleen.
Who would have thought that he would survive all of that? But he did.
Mark Schiller calls private investigator Ed Du Bois from his hospital bed.
It was hard for me to focus on this rambling, slurred speech story.
Can you send me to security guards right away, please?
So he calls Ed Du Bois, and Ed Du Bois says, look, if these guys really want you dead, and I put a guard at your door, they're going to kill you and my guard.
And I had no idea whether the story was true or not, but if it was true, then he should leave. Leave as soon as possible. His immediate need was to survive.
When Schiller's name didn't show up in the newspapers the next day, the gang realized he might not be dead.
They had a living eyewitness that could put them away. So I would think that that would be the reason they'd be looking for him.
SCHILLL.
And in fact, they already were.
So they start calling hospitals. And Jackson Memorial Hospital says, yes, there's a Marcelo Schiller here.
We left at 8 o'clock, and at 10 o'clock they came in.
As they're walking the halls of Jackson Memorial Hospital, Marcelo Schiller is on an air ambulance flight to New York. They came very close to killing him a second time.
Mark Schiller is alive, and now he wants revenge. Just before he boards a plane to New York, far from the reach of the gang, he calls George Delgado.
I'm gonna get you. look behind you. I'm coming for you.
Well, I mean, just look at it this way. If anybody did that to you, wouldn't you want to get back at them somehow?
But surprisingly, Schiller doesn't go to the cops right away.
I've always been criticized for wanting to go to the police sooner.
He has his reasons, which would become clear soon enough. Meanwhile, he hires his own private investigator to look for evidence.
The feds always say, follow the money. Okay, so that's what they did.
Du Bois notices that many of the assets signed over by Schiller were actually notarized by none other than the owner of Sun Gym, John Meese.
And John Meese was a guy that went to the same high school as I did.
Meese tells Du Bois it's all a misunderstanding and sets up a meeting. But Lugo and Delgado are late. Being the good investigator he is, he starts going through the trash.
Each one of the pieces of trash we pulled out was more dramatically involved in the case than the other. And there was photocopies of bank statements, photocopies of checks from the Sun Gym to all the bad guys, and copies of checks from Schiller's account. It was obvious to me that somebody had been in there probably the night before, the day before, going through all the evidence and throwing it away. It was really amazing.
When Delgado finally arrives, he says it's all a misunderstanding.
And George Delgado starts just trying to spin something, but Ed isn't going to have any of it.
I said, you almost had the perfect crime here, but Mark Schiller's alive, and we're going to put your ass in jail. And he held up both of his hands. He says, there's no need for that. I said, oh, yeah, really? Why? He said, we're going to give you all the assets back. And he said, we need a contract. We need a contract signed by you and Mark Schiller that you're going to accept the $1,260,000 check from us with the agreement that you will never go to the police department and tell anybody. So I'm thinking real quickly, number one, this is an unenforceable contract. You can't ever do this. And number two, how are they going to get any lawyer to draw this up?
Schiller's representatives, Du Bois, his lawyer, they go, sure, we'll enter into this agreement. The plan being, we'll get all of our clients' money back. Because if we go to the police now and have you arrested, you're going to use all that money to hire the best defense lawyers you can find. We'll never get the money back.
Ed Du Bois and Mark Schiller negotiate with the bad guys for 4 months.
But when it becomes clear the bad guys are just stalling, Schiller and Du Bois finally go to see Miami-Dade police detective Iris Deacon.
He came on April 21st of 1995. He came with a story of tortured, kidnapping, tortured, and attempted murder.
They tell her the whole tale, and she is skeptical.
4 months later, I have to question your credibility at that time. A true victim would come to the police immediately.
So they're listening to a story and they just don't buy it.
There were a lot of things that were suspicious, only because of the fact that he didn't come to us first.
She wondered, was he hiding something?
And now I know. Now I'm like really upset. These guys aren't going to believe him.
But even though she isn't entirely buying it, Iris Deacon does begin looking into his story.
The first day I met Mark Schiller, after the interview, I went down to his residence on Ocala Cove. I talked to one neighbor, and the neighbor told me, yes, that he knew Schiller, but had not seen him since November, and that since then, somebody else has taken over the house. I told myself, oh boy, this is good.
Maybe there was something to this after all, so she began examining the paper trail.
I had started to get the subpoenas for Schiller's offshore accounts.
But meanwhile, the bad guys are still living large.
They wanted everybody to believe they were high rollers. They were very good-looking men, and women liked them.
There are toys to buy, girlfriends to impress.
The party's inside.
But they're already beginning to run low on funds. After all, they had that lifestyle to maintain. Now how could they possibly make more money? Du Bois warns the cops that these guys are going to do it again.
I told him, I said, Iris, this is the meanest group of criminals that I have ever investigated. If you guys don't take them off the street, they're going to do this again. And she commented, I think you've been watching too much TV.
Deacon remembers it differently. She asks Schiller to take a polygraph to confirm he's telling the truth.
If I had access to Mark Schiller, those subjects would have been arrested.
But Mark Schiller, believing the police aren't taking him seriously, skips the polygraph.
I think the people that dropped the ball are Mark Schiller and Ed Du Bois. The Miami-Dade Police Department worked that investigation. What they didn't have was a willing victim.
If he'd have wanted revenge, he should have come to us at first.
In fact, Schiller leaves the country to rejoin his wife and kids, now living in Colombia.
He's out of here. The police aren't taking him seriously, and he goes back to South America, which is a shame, because had they listened to him, the next victims might still be alive.
Coming up, another day, another millionaire.
Hey, who is that?
Grigo, my ex-boyfriend.
And she says, oh, that's my ex-boyfriend. He's very wealthy.
That was their business plan. Find wealthy men, have somebody finger them, and then go out and get them.
After surviving a brutal attack, Mark Schiller has two goals: get his money back and get justice for what he suffered. But his attempt to negotiate for his money has failed. And when he goes to the police, they aren't sure they believe him. Delgado and his crew are still on the loose, and Miami's crime rate is about to go up.
The Sun Gym gang was running out of money and looking for a new target.
Who owns that one, you know?
They were just about to find him. In the 90s, in exclusive Miami social circles, yellow was the new black, and everyone loved to show off. Hungarian millionaire Frank Griga fit right in.
And he was a guy who was living the American dream. He had a beautiful house in Sunny Isles. He had a beautiful girlfriend. He felt like the world was his, and it was.
Griga had made his millions in a new all-American innovation, phone sex. He had a yacht, a palatial mansion, a bombshell girlfriend named Christina Furton, and now a set of stalkers who were looking to pull off a repeat performance of what they'd done with Mark Schiller. It was Doorbal who had found him.
Noel Doorbal is sitting there with his girlfriend, stripper, going through her photo album, and he sees a picture of this young guy next to a beautiful yellow Lamborghini, and he said,
Hey, who is that?
Grigo, my ex-boyfriend.
And she says, oh, that's my ex-boyfriend. He's very wealthy.
They had a business plan. That was their business plan. Find wealthy men, have somebody finger them, and then go out and get them.
That was who Danny wanted to be, and that was who Doorbal wanted to be. They wanted to be Frank Griga, but they weren't.
I would say about $1.5 million, $2 million.
Lugo and Doorbal approached Griga with a business deal and asked him and his girlfriend over to Doorbal's apartment.
They've bought everything they need for the kidnapping. They bought Rompum, a tranquilizer that is used on horses. They're going to take everything they had, just like they did with Marcelo Schiller.
There was a ruse, a plan. Doorbal would take Frank into the bedroom.
Definitely want to take a couple days, think about it.
But right from the start, it goes terribly wrong.
Danny Lugo is sitting with Christina Furton, and Noel Doorbal says to Frank, oh, come on in the bedroom.
I'll put some cables through the roof.
Nice. But she starts hearing this clamoring and this banging and all this stuff, and she gets up and is shocked to find Griga in a chokehold and is basically killing her.
Doorbal was a steroid user, a man that I don't think knew his own strength.
She screams and immediately injected with Rompum, and the plan is already going south.
Dude, he doesn't have a pulse. What the hell?
Before they ever get a dime, Frank Griga is now dead, and they don't have a penny.
Certain recriminations are voiced.
Saw him, bro. He started fighting with me. Jeez.
They amuse themselves until she starts coming to. They resolve that they can at least get Christina to get them into Griga's mansion.
And as she comes to, she starts crying and asking to see Frank, who she saw just hours ago being murdered. And they say, we'll let you see Frank. What are the codes to the house?
I don't know it. I don't know.
They slap her. They ask her for the codes.
But they've injected her with horse tranquilizers, so she's not the most coherent, and she's certainly not the most cooperative. But they keep pushing her, and they inject her with some more. And And she rattles off some numbers, which they write down.
Lugo drives to the mansion, but the code doesn't work, so he calls Delgado and Doorball, who were at the house.
Danny Lugo, on speakerphone, dials Noel Doorball and says, I need another code. The code didn't work. Get one.
Hold on.
And at this point, Doorball gets back on the phone, and his words to Danny is,
Yo, man, this bitch is cold.
Christina was shot with enough horse tranquilizer to kill 4 1,000-pound horses.
So now they've got 2 dead bodies and not a dime. So what do you do?
Mr. Lugo went to Home Depot and used his own credit card to purchase power saw to dismember the bodies.
And the case is particularly gruesome in that respect because the chainsaw gets caught in Christina's hair and it tangles up and it won't work. So they just throw it aside and they pull out their trusty axe.
And they were put into one of those big oil drums. Then they disposed of them someplace in the Everglades.
They say each man's death diminishes us. But does it diminish us less if we get to drive his Lamborghini? Meanwhile, Frank and Christina are missing, and their friends and family are frantic.
They call the police. And where were they last seen? Well, they were last going to dinner with Danny Lugo and Noel Doorball. And somebody goes, what?
Your life insurance policy.
Weren't those the 2 guys that Schiller guy told us kidnapped them?
Homicide asked me if I was investigating the Mark Schiller case, and I told them I was. And they told me there had been a kidnapping. Well, I felt terrible, of course.
And all of a sudden, everything hits the fan.
You know, screw them. You know, they're paid to be detectives and do the case right, and they didn't do it.
I got a call from Ed. Tells me that they did it again.
29213 18th Avenue South.
On June 3rd at 7 a.m., 75 police officers swooped in to arrest Doorball and Delgado and their accomplices.
Do you see Delgado? Where is he?
Noel Doorball, George Delgado, all in custody.
As they were being arrested, was each of them already starting to think about how to save his own skin?
Get your hands up!
I didn't know at that time whether any of the defendants would wind up testifying against the other defendants and cut some kind of a deal for themselves.
In fact, it would be George Delgado who ultimately cuts a deal. The man that betrayed his mentor would turn on his friends.
He flipped right away.
we made a deal with the devil. We wanted to know the information that we couldn't know because we weren't there.
Who is it going to be that's going to be the least culpable, even though they're all bad?
Doorball initially admitted to the abduction, but then stopped talking. Lugo had fled to the Bahamas, but was soon apprehended as well. The trial began on February 24th, 1998.
It took 6 months. There were 1,200 items of evidence.
And 2 juries to bring closure for the families of Griega and Furton. The assistant state attorney was Gail Levine.
This was a life-changing case for me. This case was the reason why I'm a career prosecutor.
They slapped me, they hit me,
For star witness Mark Schiller, seeing the men who had tortured him in handcuffs was a moment to savor.
So, sort of a kind of a power trip thing. I was the one with the power, and just they had lost all their power, so.
And for investigator Ed Du Bois,
I loved it. You know, I looked every one of them right smack in the eye, and I just loved testifying against those bastards.
The evidence brought forth by Gail Levine was unassailable. The verdicts came in.
Daniel Lugo is guilty of first-degree murder.
It took only 14 minutes for the jury to decide to sentence Lugo to death, 18 minutes for Doorball.
It was a sobering moment. I remember exactly where I was, how I felt, how it sounded.
For Mark Schiller, after 4 years, finally vindication, payback, revenge. He has returned from South America numerous times to help the prosecution. Now he comes back to help one more time.
Marcelo Schiller did not have to come back for the penalty phase. He wasn't needed, but he did.
Yeah, I came back.
He reads an impact statement that everyone agrees is incredibly powerful. He gets off the stand, and then...
Schiller came all the way back from Colombia at the behest of the Assistant State Attorney on the case, Gail Levine, not knowing what was about to happen to him.
And as he walks out of my courtroom door, the FBI grabs him.
The FBI has just 3 words to say to him.
That you're under arrest.
Revenge is a tricky thing. Want it too badly, and it can come back to bite you. Marcelo Schiller had helped put away his tormentors, but in doing so, helped the feds build a case against himself.
He comes back and takes a stand, and as he walks out of my courtroom door, the FBI grabs him and charges him with Medicare fraud.
Like so many other Miami stories, things turned out to be not quite what they seemed. Remember his nutritional company? The feds say he used it to bill $14.6 million in fraudulent Medicare charges.
The FBI was waiting for him, and nobody can tell me that Gail Levine didn't know about that, okay?
I think Gail Levine was in a difficult position. If the feds are investigating, they're investigating.
I was very focused on what I needed to do. Whatever the federal government was doing was really not my concern.
There are times when the federal government has its investigation and we have ours. And sometimes we coordinate those and sometimes we do not. We intentionally and respectfully keep them separate.
In the end, Schiller pled guilty to a single count of Medicare fraud. At the last minute, he received help from an unexpected source.
I was asked by his lawyer if I would go testify in federal court on Marcelo Schiller's behalf, which is unheard of. You know, judges just don't do that. But there just was something different about this case. That man was tortured worse than a prisoner of war. It was horrific. Bam! Just something in me told me that it should be taken into consideration in the sentencing for the Medicare fraud.
And what of George Delgado? In a story full of revenge, perhaps he got the final payback by fingering Mark Schiller to the FBI. He served 9 years but is now free. His new wife told us he's a changed man who wants to put these events behind him.
When you look at it all, Danny Lugo was bad, you know, but George Delgado, in my mind, was worse.
This is not your typical case. Then this is not your typical story with a happy ending. They almost got away with it. If Marcelo Schiller had died, they might very well have gotten away with that crime.
I think everything happens for a reason. Maybe I'm still learning what the reason was.
Well, it's a story that has everything in it. It has fast cars and beautiful women and drugs and millions of dollars, kidnapping and crime. And in that sense, yeah, it's a Miami story. As for the lack of resolution, the lack of a clear hero, I think that's just life.
Mark Schiller served 46 months, the minimum sentence possible. He and his wife divorced. He's written a book called Pain and Gain, The Untold True Story. And a major Hollywood movie was made about these events, starring Mark Wahlberg as Danny Lugo. As of 2013, Danny Lugo and Noel Doorbal are still appealing their convictions. I'm John Quinones. Please join us next time for another edition of 2020 on ID.